Finn Hoff to help me, which was awesome. At the time, you were 15, right? Yes, 15. And he was like, I know a lot about bones. And I was like, okay, I trust you. And he did know a lot about bones because he has been involved in paleontology for like a long time. I'm sure he'll get a little bit more into that. He's going to tell you about some of his excavation experience, which is really cool. But I am very pleased to have him here today for a special presentation. Kim wanted me to mention that Formal Museum Club is going down to one time a month, the first Thursday of the month, and to keep your eye out on the newsletter. But anyways, that's enough for me. Thanks for being here today, guys. I'm going to turn it over to Finn. Take it away, Finn.
Hello, everybody. I'm Finn, as you may or may not know. I'm a senior in Alturas Preparatory Academy, and I'm going to talk about paleontology and really, really old dead things. Before we get started, why did the Dinochirus cross the road?
Why?
Because chickens haven't evolved yet. This is how to die. Sorry. This is how to die and live forever. A really long time. A short presentation on the basics of paleontology. So first of all, what is paleontology? It is the study of past life or past living things. It's doing science with fossils. If there's no fossils, it's a little hard to do paleontology because that's what it's all about. Branches of paleontology are pretty wide. There's a whole lot of them. Got some really, really small ones, quite literally like molecular paleontology and paleozoology and micropaleontology over there. And there's also really broad fields like taphonomy and paleoclimatology and paleozoology, which they're very, very broad, very large fields of study. Taphonomy is especially important because it is about the study of what happens to things after they die or the conditions that they die in. It has a lot to deal with how things fossilize and how they are preserved. And there's so many more. What is a fossil? It's probably important to know for paleontology. It is the geologically altered remains of a living thing and or its behavior, as long as it's about 10,000 years old or so. Now, these rules aren't very structural. Fossils can be younger or older, or sometimes they aren't even altered at all, but every fossil has to achieve one of those definitions. And all of these collections of objects are fossils. There are three primary kinds of fossils. There are body fossils, trace fossils, and chemical fossils. Body fossils are preserved physical remains of an organism's body. This is probably what you think of when you think of a fossil, like a dinosaur skull right here, or over here I have a bit of petrified wood and this megalodon shark tooth. These are body fossils. There's also trace fossils, such as these footprints right here. Trace fossils are the evidence of an organism being somewhere, or an organism's body being somewhere. Things like imprints and other specific objects that I'll get into later. And there's also chemical fossils, which I know the least about personally, but we'll get into that in a second. One second, sorry. Body fossils, first of all, there's a lot of different kinds of them because they're some of the most common fossils. Starting with one that breaks the first rule is unaltered fossils, like this mammoth tooth right here, and there's a mammoth tooth in that cabinet behind y'all. A lot of mammoth teeth can be considered unaltered fossils because they're just huge bricks of enamel and bone, and they don't like to biodegrade very quickly. So there's plenty of mammoth teeth that aren't fossilized. Most of them are not fossilized, but they're considered fossils because they have that 10,000-year-old mark. So they're plenty old, but they're not altered in any way. Next are frozen and mummified fossils. Right here is a frozen wolf pup, saber-toothed cat cub right there. There's also amber preservation, which you might see in Jurassic Park or something like that, where ancient tree sap and tree resin has engulfed an organism or some kind of biological matter, and it just keeps it nice and sealed away, and that can be buried and be preserved for millions of years. In this example right here, that is a bird skull from the Jurassic. And then the most common fossils, and the ones you probably think about, are permineralized and petrified fossils. I have 3 fun examples right here. So petrified fossils happen when organic matter is replaced with solid mineral matter. And it leaves it behind this perfect stone replica of the body it replicated. Right here I have an opalized and pyritized fossil. This is an opalized dinosaur tooth. So that same process happens, except it happens with a specific mineral, in this case, opal, resulting in this beautiful iridescent blue tooth. And there's also pyritization, which happened to this animal right here, where pyrite fills in the gaps. So you have this golden trilobite. And there's also recrystallized fossils, which happen when too much mineral is in the water that's replacing the fossil. So it almost starts to become a geo, where crystals start forming into little holes and gaps in the fossil. So how do we make a fossil? This is in context of mineralized and petrified fossils, the most common ones. So once your bone, enamel, or hard part of a body is buried, the organic matter will immediately start to very slowly decay. The important part, and the reason we don't have soft body fossils very often, is that the decay has to be slow, super slow, over hopefully decades if you can do that. But because it's buried hopefully in a nice rich sediment, water and moisture will come through, and as this degrades and starts to make little holes in its organic matter, that water and precipitate will infill the gaps, and replace all of those holes. So eventually, after a long, long, long time, once it's completely degraded, you're left with a perfect stone replica of whatever body part was buried. The most common minerals that fill these gaps are silica, calcite, and iron. Silica fossils are the most common because silica is super prevalent in nature. They are usually in shades of gray, sometimes they're in shades of brown, and they can even be green sometimes, which is pretty rare, but it happens. Calcite fossils are usually very chalky and fragile. They're almost completely white. And then iron fossils are usually brown or black. They're very rich in color, and they also smell, which is interesting. Trace fossils are the fossils of an animal's presence, where it was somewhere at some point long ago. Internal and external molds are very common. External molds are also called imprints. So in this case, a shell was buried, but the shell itself dissolved, but the rock around it preserved the shell's texture. Then there's also internal molds, where in this case, a shell was filled with sediment, but then the shell dissolved around the sediment, leaving the inside of the shell totally imprinted reverse. There are also cast fossils, which are kind of weird because they sound like permineralized fossils because they are a semi-perfect replica of a body. But in this case, the body is already completely decomposed or dissolved. So, in this case, there was an ammonite shell at some point. The shell dissolved, but the rock around it was preserved in a 3D model. Now, what's cool is cast fossils can form with external molds, where an external mold fossil will be washed over with mud or sand, and you'll get a cast fossil inside of that internal mold. So it can sometimes be a copy of a copy. Then there's also tracks, which are pretty common fossils. Right here I have these human footprints from New Mexico. I recommend looking at these, they're very, very fascinating. And there's also corpulents, which is fossilized poop, which is another really important fossil to science. I'm being serious. And there's also gastroliths, which are stomach stones. I have a gastrolith right here that I've had on my adventures. And animals would consume large stones. Chickens do it, and so do a couple living mammals. And they'll have these stones either in their stomach or their gizzard, where their food goes because they can't chew, so they let the rocks do it for them. It's a pretty cool strategy. And there's chemical fossils, which I'm definitely not an expert on. They are very complicated, and I really don't know a whole lot about them. But there are two important types. There are molecular fossils, which are fossilized molecules, or molecules that are considered fossil, such as crude oil and anything related to fossil fuels. And there's also isotope ratios, which I can't explain very well, but I do know that this graph has something to do with them. I know that organic compounds found in really old rocks and substrate are considered isotope ratio fossils. In this case, I do have the isotope ratio fossil in this little tube right here, and it's pretty neat because the bottom of this tube is dirt with dinosaur stuff in it, and then in the top of it, there's no dinosaurs whatsoever. In the middle is ash and indium, and iridium from the KPG impact, the asteroid that wiped them out. So here's some important vocabulary for later. You're going to want to remember this. This is Lagerstatten. It's a German word meaning place of storage. And it's when a certain area is really great to die if you want to be preserved. Because Lagerstatten happens when the environment and the sediments in said environment are just perfectly tuned to preserve organic matter. So in this case, here's an ancestor of a velvet worm and an ancient species of wasp. This one's from the Jurassic. And this animal right here is called Morella. It's from the Cambrian, and it is an entirely soft-bodied organism. It had no bones and no exoskeleton, no hard parts whatsoever, no teeth even. And the only reason we know about it is because of the Burgess Shale in Canada, which is one of the largest and one of the most nearby lagerstones here in America. And it has thousands of other beautifully preserved fossils and animals we only know existed because of those perfect conditions. So if you do want to be fossilized, you should probably know where you want to die. I recommend somewhere soggy. Marine environments, swamps and bogs, and areas prone to flash floods are pretty good and very reliable. So beaches, ice caves, beautiful stuff like that, and also flash floods. But if you don't have access to those, I think that you can also go for areas where landslides are common, areas that are secluded, usually like biologically secluded, like deserts where other animals or organisms won't go after your body, or tar pits, and places that are super cold can also be not as reliable, but other options. Now, how to die. This is a bit more unfortunate, preferably as quick as possible. That's probably the best option. You do immediately, or as fast as you can, want to get covered in deep sediment. This way, other organisms won't try and dig you up and displace your bones and get you out of your resting place. But once you are buried, add water with minerals, like most bottled water, and wait about 10,000 years. And then, boom, you're a fossil. Oh my goodness. You are dead now, but your remains will be preserved for millions and millions of years for some scientists to maybe dig up and find. So, now that you know what fossils are, and what the basic study of paleontology is, you might want to know how they do it. So, the first part about paleontology is figuring out where your fossils are, because it's kind of hard to do it without those. So, what paleontologists will typically look for, you want to let the environment do some of the work for you. You want to go with areas that have loose sedimentary rocks. These are rocks that are made of sediment, so small particulate, mudstone, sandstone, dirt in general is a great start. Arid, barren, and rocky environments are great because you have wind erosion constantly coming through and smoothing out your surfaces for you and just flattening everything for you. These are some photographs from my time in camp in Ekalaka, Montana. Hill creeks, rivers, and lake beds are another great place to look, but it is a little riskier because water erosion is far more effective than wind erosion, and fossils are also lost that way. Now let's say you do find something that you think is a fossil. You want to see if it's a possible fragment or what body part it is. And if you can figure out those two pieces of information, you can figure out what organism it is, because information is critical for getting it out of the dirt. So how do you dig up a fossil? Let's say you do know what it is, and you're very certain about it, and you hopefully know the size of the thing you're preparing to dig up. Paleontologists want to start with exposing the work area, not the fossil quite yet. You're going to use tools that can displace a lot of material, but are still fairly precise. So you're going to want to use shovels, pickaxes, picks, and digging blades. Right here is a shelf being exposed with some theropod fragments, some of those carnivorous dinosaurs. After that, you are going to pedestal your workspace. Once you have the thing you want to dig up, and you're certain you want to dig up just that part, you begin pedestaling. This is when you lower the space around your fossil to put it on a pedestal. It's in the name. You'll be using trowels, screwdrivers, and awls, more precise instruments of destruction, to expose that pedestal. And then after you can do that, you jacket it, which is a very scientific process where you put a bunch of plaster on burlap and you just slap it on there. So now you have your plaster-covered mound of dirt with probably, hopefully, some really cool fossils in there. And once you have that, you can get it out of the ground and move it from the workspace. This is a very advanced paleontological movement rig. So let's say you get it out of the ground and back to the lab in one piece. You're lucky. Now you can begin cleaning the fossil, which is one of the most satisfying parts. Because if you did collect something cool, you're going to find it here. Because when you take it out of the ground, you have to flip it over. So the thing you were previously working on is now at the bottom. You have to work from the bottom up now. So when you're cleaning out your individual bone or individual specimens, you're going to use trowels for most dirt, but then you're going to want to move to brushes, Dremels, and dental scrapers. Very precise tools, because you don't want to damage the fossil, because now we are actively engaging on the fossil. We're not clearing anything around it, we're not clearing anything below it. You are clearing the stuff on the fossil, and sometimes parts of the fossil itself are removed to get underneath fossils below. Hopefully you do that all in one piece. That's the hard part. Well, let's say you do clean it. In this case, this is a Triceratops frill right here. You can do laboratory research. This is where most of your research is going to happen, because it's hard to move these around. They're very, very heavy. This is where you can make all of your important observations and write them down into things like osteology reports, where you have documents of the whole skeleton of an animal, if you're very lucky. But 3D scanning is typically what happens, and you can also make casts and models out of your specimen now. And now this one fossil that's been dug up through probably a few years, unfortunately, It's now casted up and sent to museums all around the world, and this one fossil alone is teaching everybody else a little bit more about ancient life. Now, I'm sure this all sounds very exciting, and you'd like to get into this too. And good news, there's things that you can do. Fossil hunting and rock hounding are two really simple, easy to get into hobbies that are absolutely scientific. But if you want to do more than that, or just not that, you can volunteer at your local museum. I don't know where you find one of those. You could also go to a summer camp, like I did, and have hands-on experience there. And the internet has all of the information in the world, and you can educate yourself on this, and that's pretty remarkable in itself. Now, there are some ethics that you want to keep in mind. If you do pursue fossil hunting and rock hounding, as always, leave no trace. That's important, especially nowadays more than ever. And there are some designated collecting areas all over the world. There's places like Crystal Park in Montana where you can dig up naturally forming quartz crystals right there, and all that land is protected. And there's plenty of pop-up U-dig spots on Utah and Montana highways that are probably legitimate. It is important to check your local treasure laws. They're usually somewhat similar in most states. I know in Idaho, as long as you find something on your private property, you can keep it. But I do recommend if you do find something cool on your property, you let paleontologists do some work on it. And be careful what you buy online if you do more fossil collecting than just your own stuff, because there's always people trying to sell fakes, so watch out for all of that. Now let's move on to something cool. I've got some examples of some fabulous fossils. We're starting off with a local hero, Helicoprion, or the circle-toothed ratfish, which isn't an enticing name by any means, but it's weird, and I think that's cool. So, this gentleman named Karpinski in the 17 and 1800s found this really weird, by all means, fossil. Originally, he thought it was some kind of plant, but looking at it, it looks like teeth. But typically, teeth don't look like circles. That was the weird part. So, after enough research, he figured out that they are definitely teeth. And there was more than one fossil of them. There were, I want to say, there was close to 20 or 30 found in Karpinski's lifetime. And the closest he got was this. He wasn't entirely sure because, as this was a cartilaginous animal, its skeleton doesn't fossilize. Cartilage is too soft. There's no bones in its body, only these weird circular teeth. Now, rather recently, here in Idaho, in the late 90s and very early 2000s, this beautiful toothed whale was found. It's called the Paris specimen because it was found in Paris, Idaho, not too far away from here. And it was found in the Paris Triassic biota, and portions of that are, vocabulary word, Lagerstatten. They did preserve some of that cartilaginous skeleton around this jaw whorl. Now it's a little hard to see here, but these 3D models make it a lot easier to see. And Helicoprion had these weird 3 jaw bones or jaw cartilage structures. And this told us exactly where its jaw sat, which doesn't make it a lot less weird. It looked something like this. It had a toothless top jaw, or a top jaw with very few plated teeth in it. And it's still a bit of a mystery how it ate. We know that its jaw moved in a circular motion. Not like the teeth itself. That would be pretty cool, because it does get the nickname buzzsaw shark, but its jaw didn't rotate quite like that. We know that it pursued fish, small fish probably, and squids. And apparently it was successful enough because they got really big, up to, I think the larger size estimates are in the high 20s for feet long. I do have how old it is right here. 290 to 225 million years ago, so that's late Permian and early Triassic. So still no dinosaurs quite yet. It's a very, very old animal. But it was successful until its food source died out and it went extinct immediately. But it left us with a bunch of really, really absurd fossils that confused the guy with a cool last name. Here's a recent find, and it's a little sad. This is the Bad-Yarika mummy found in Siberia on the Bad-Yarika Lake River. It is a mummy of a Homotherium, which is a saber-toothed cat. Unfortunately, this was a little guy, and he was a cub, and I think he was between 2 to 4 weeks old as of his death and preservation, which is really sad. But he's super important to science because he is super, super, super beautifully preserved. So here's him compared to a lion cub, and here's a lion cub's paw compared to Homotherium's paw. Now, other than looking at that, has no living relatives today, and this being a living relative of some saber-toothed cats, is one of the reasons why this find is important on account of no living relatives. It is completely extinct. Nobody, no family, and beautifully preserved. He has these scientific term toe beans that are very large compared to lions. Now, the actual term is no one knows. Carpal pads, sorry. But I will be referring to them as toe beans. They are really wide and spaced out, and his paws are significantly fluffier than lions. And that is because these were snow cats. They lived entirely in the Siberian tundra, which was just as cold as it was back then as it is today. This exact specimen, the Bad-Yarika mummy, was 2 million years old. Homotherium as a species was around for almost 4 million years. They were 4 million years ago to about 12,000 years ago. So really, really old human relatives were likely eaten by these guys. But, it's just a kitten, so it's okay. He does have this tooth beard where his gigantic kitten sabers would have gone into his cheeks. An important difference, Homotherium is not very closely related to Smilodon, which is the saber-toothed cat that you think of and you hear about. Smilodon sabers were huge and they stuck out of its mouth. This means that they were dry and they were pretty fragile, so it was kind of a precision weapon. Homotherium is arguably a little bit cooler because it did have shorter sabers, but they were protected in its cheeks, so they were constantly full of moisture, so they could just use them whenever, and it was devastating because they were very successful animals. Also, compared to domestic cats, which would be these guys' closest relatives, domestic cats have no dew claw. They have another toe bean or carpal pad where that claw would be. But these guys still have it, and it's probably for running on ice and compacted snow, things that are typically very hard to run on. And I have another diagram of the whole mummy itself. It's just the top half of its body and both arms. Again, he was super small, which is really sad, but he is a beautifully preserved animal, and they were very fluffy. Here's a pretty popular fossil. If you do any research of your own in paleontology, you probably know about this specimen. It's referred to as the fighting dinosaur specimen that was found in Mongolia. This fossil is super cool because it displays predatory animal behavior, and they've been fighting for 80 million years, permanently locked in combat, and that's weird and cool and poetic. The two animals in this fossil is this small ceratopsian named Protoceratops, which might have come up to your thigh, and the famous, devastating monster, Velociraptor, which isn't as big as you see it in the movies. You've probably heard that before. You might have been 3 feet tall, at best. But in this, neither of them won. There is some interesting evidence from the fossil where we can try and figure out how these guys died and how they were preserved mid-fight. And the theory is this guy was hungry, and this guy didn't want to be eaten. So they engaged in conflict. And through the conflict, the Protoceratops had bitten the Velociraptor's left arm and broken it. And the Velociraptor had his big old hand claws and his huge foot dew claw, which, not kidding you, that's 2 inches long, all through in his neck gutty works. And Protoceratops was probably bleeding out and decided in a last-ditch effort to power slam the Velociraptor, breaking some of its ribs, and making it so the Velociraptor was now covered by an animal that's 6 or more times its body weight and is also bleeding to death. So it's a brutal scene, but you have this guy who is now being suffocated and this guy who is bleeding out, laying on top of each other, locked in combat, and then eventually, or very suddenly, or even during the conflict, were buried by a collapsing sand dune. It is a legendary fossil by any means. And it's beautifully preserved with the articulation of the spine and some of the arm bone still stuck in Protoceratops's jaw. Last up, I have this, another sad fossil right here. It's referred to as the Triassic Cuttle, and it is 2 animals, Thrinaxodon and Brunistega. Thrinaxodon, really cool name, it's fun to say, is this little guy right here, who's a reptilian-like mammal, and that term is a bit of a misnomer because they were more reptilian-like mammals. They're far more closely related to mammals than they were reptiles. So it is, by an extent of the phylogenetic tree, our ancestor. This is a lot of greats grandma. And this little guy right here is Brunistega, which was an amphibian. It was kind of like a weird, toothed, running, predatory frog. A little disturbing by any means, but really cool. And for some reason, in the 2000s, these paleontologists dug up a preserved Thrinaxodon burrow. And I could tell it was a Thrinaxodon burrow because his snout was poking out right here. And they wanted to figure out what else was in there. I mean, probably it was just a nice preserved Thrinaxodon. But, and I never knew this was a thing. They had to bring it to a particle accelerator, the Hadron Collider, because apparently paleontologists use that a lot more than I thought of. And you shoot it with some particles in a big old tube, and you can see inside, and instead of finding one nice Thrinaxodon, they found 2 creatures who've been stuck in a hole together for the last 125 million years? 250, way longer. 250 million years they've been stuck in a hole together. Now, the theory on why these 2 silly creatures got stuck together is Thrinaxodon is known as a burrowing animal. It is known that it has several burrows. There's been bunches of burrows found with Thrinaxodon bones in them. But the weird part is the Brunistega, the weird frog monster that's stuck in it with him. Now, the current prevailing theory is Thrinaxodon was napping in its burrow, like it probably did pretty often. And this Brunistega, due to rising water levels near whatever swamp it lived by, was searching for higher ground and decided, going up this hill, that this hole, this burrow that was leading upwards, would lead to higher ground. It eventually snuggled up next to this Thrinaxodon, and why the Thrinaxodon didn't do anything about it, we don't know. Maybe there's a symbiotic relationship between the 2. But it crawled up next to this guy, and soon after, with the rising water levels, They were immediately compounded and sealed with mud and would then collapse, which preserved these guys perfectly. But the nice thing to know is they died quickly because the Thymaxodon's neck is absolutely snapped, and this Brumistega was destroyed as its ribs are everywhere. And it's another beautiful, incredible fossil. Very sad, but very intriguing. And that's all for me for now. Before I go for questions, I want to tell you one more joke. And knock knock.
Who's there?
The dino climbers from earlier. Any questions?
What did you say, Nancy? What was your response?
The dino climbers from earlier.
So Thomas, DNA from the frozen or mummified.
This guy?
Is new AI gonna help us put those people back together again?
I do not know a whole lot about that. I know that DNA only survives for about 7,500 years, so I'd imagine probably not putting them back together, but there's a company out there that's trying to bring some creatures back. It's definitely some interesting stuff. I think they're called Colossus.
So especially with this critter, and the Smilodon, you said Smilodon has the sabers that are exposed, and therefore more brittle and more of a precision instrument,
Yes.
whereas this guy had teeth that would be enclosed in cheek pouches, or in its cheeks.
Yeah.
Why would Smilodon have, what's my word? What would the advantage of having the exposed sabers be over enclosed sabers?
They're too big. They are very, very large sabers. I think Smilodon sabers are they can get up to 7.5 inches long. So they would have had an extension to their mouth bones themselves. And there is an animal, I don't remember its name, I want to say it's something like Thylosmilus, and it's an Australian marsupial, but it actually has these weird extended pouch jaws where it could keep its sabers. But Smilodon, just the benefit of having these huge sabers overweighed the benefit of having more robust sabers, but effectively they were just too big to keep in the mouth. Anything else? Yes?
What got you interested in this?
Figuring out that there were more animals than there already are. I think that was probably the big thing. Was I like creatures, and now that I know that there are more of them, but they're underground, that's even cooler.
And you said DNA breaks down after 7,500 years. That goes for even like this right here. That's the frozen mummies.
Yes. No matter how well things are preserved, there's very few factors that make DNA not break down. Because DNA is an acid itself, it naturally breaks down over time, because that's what aging is. So it's very hard to keep DNA from decaying. Yeah, especially in natural sediments. Yes.
Will you tell us what else is on the table? You said the gastrolith and the vial of cool.
Yes.
Fancy beer.
Sorry.
What are the other two in the middle?
I can pass these around. This is a gastrolith. It is a stomach stone from an ancient animal called a plesiosaur, which was this deep sea creature. And because this species in particular had gastroliths in its stomach, that means it probably ate shellfish because they wouldn't chew their food. They had these big needle-like or these crushing plates. They didn't chew it. They just kind of killed it and then put it in their stomach. And then they'd swallow these large stones, and these stones would mash up what's ever in their gut for them. So they're kind of circumventing having to chew their food. It's a pretty cool strategy. I believe I said earlier that chickens do it, and they do, but they swallow much smaller stones instead of these large rocks.
How can you tell?
We figured that out because this was during one of my years in dinosaur camp, and it's out in the desert, so everything that is being eroded by wind erosion. The rocks are smooth, but they're kind of rough. They still have a sandpapery texture, whereas that is perfectly, weirdly smooth. And that's from water erosion, and that means it was once some kind of stone that was exposed to a lot of water and acid based off of the holes. So it was probably in the stomach acid of a creature. And it also helped that plesiosaur vertebrae was found very close by to that rock. And there were also several other rocks like it. Yes.
That was my question too.
Heck yeah. I've also got this piece of petrified wood. I found this in a parking lot. That's the whole story with this one. It's a petrified fossil.
Petrified parking lot?
It appears so. I think I found a couple other small pieces, but those, you can find those, I guess, anywhere. Then I have this megalodon tooth from that big shark that they made a movie about once. I'm sorry. This is it's a small one. Because they get a lot bigger. Some teeth get up to 8 inches long and like 3.5 inches wide. They were huge. This one's a little fragile, and I'm afraid I can't pass it around, but this is that dinosaur, no dinosaur, death of dinosaur. It was an example of a chemical fossil of isotopes, because this middle layer is ash and iridium from the Chicxulub meteorite impact.
Where was that impact?
It was near Mexico. At the time, it was, because of continental drift, it was technically in the Pacific Ocean, but it was still where the now today named Chicxulub Peninsula, where the asteroid got its name, that's where it is. And there's still evidence of that crater, although it's been eroded down. They can see the outline in the seabed.
Are there humanoid fossils?
Lots. There are lots of human ancestors and Homo sapien fossils too. The human species got pretty diverse. I want to say the peak of diversity was probably around 500 to 1 million years ago. It was up to, I want to say, 5 human species all existing at once. Yeah. Yes?
What are your future plans as far as where you want to study and what area of all of this are you most interested in?
Yes. Wonderful question. I'm not totally sure, but I have a rough idea. I'm hoping to go to University of Idaho up in Moscow and get some kind of education in geology or zoology, depending on what more specific thing I want to go into. And from there, I'm thinking Oregon State for hopefully a doctorate in a branch of paleontology. I am really interested in reconstruction, because that one's a little bit difficult, because all we have is bones for the most part, and not a whole lot else.
Can you?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
So the reconstruction you would do is like what you see on mystery shows where they put the clay and build out a face.
Yeah, sometimes, or stuff like paleo and adding on to osteology, trying to figure out what these animals actually looked like. Yeah.
What is, can you tell us a little bit about like what maybe your favorite find was when you were at Museum?
Oh, well, that gastrolith is probably one of them because I got to keep it. They don't usually let you do that. That was alongside one of my now favorite ancient organisms, a mosasaur called Tylosaurus. It's that weird sea reptile that you see if you've seen those recent Jurassic World movies. This big one jumps out and eats the shark. That one's a little bit too big, but it was named Vicky, and it's in a warehouse in Ikalaka, and some of it is displayed in the Carter County Museum. That's probably one of my favorite things I ever got to participate in. 2 years after that, no, last year, this year, we got to return to the Vicky dig site after she had been completely excavated, and I accidentally kicked up a little bit of dirt and found her thumb, which is cool.
Is that ash layer and iridium layer globally?
Yes, yeah, for the most part, there are a couple bits on Earth where it doesn't show up, like on the opposite side of the planet. There's not a whole lot of ash, but almost entirely encompassing the planet, there's a thick, invisible, dark layer, which is really cool and really spooky at the same time.
I was gonna ask, like, out of all of the animals that you know of, the extinct ones, what's your favorite? If you have one.
I think my current favorite ancient creature is Dinokairos, which is a weird duck-billed. It's a weird dinosaur. It's one of the stranger ones. It's really tall and it's got long arms but big claws and it's got a duck for a face. I think that's probably why it's my favorite. Yeah.
Sweet. Are there any last minute questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Finn.